Section 18 of Crime, Its Causes and Remedies by Cesare Lombroso. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Leon Harvey. Chapter 18. Causes of Political Crimes. Subchapter 108. We have seen that political crime is a kind of crime of passion, punishable only because it involves an offence against the conservative sentiments of the human race, particularly in the fields of religion and politics. We have seen that it is especially frequent among the young, and in the most intelligent and cultivated nations. Subchapter 109. Orography. The influence which a lighter atmospheric pressure has upon this kind of crime is incontestably very great. It can be said that the most revolutionary peoples have always been found among mountains. Witness the struggles of the Semites, the Marsi, the Ligures, the Cantabri, and the Bruti against the Romans, those of the Asturians against the Goths and Saracens, and those of the Albanians, Druses, Maronites, and Maonites against the Turks. Just so it was in the Cevennes in France, and in the Valtelline and the Pinerolo in Italy, that the first efforts in favour of religious liberty were made, notwithstanding the dragonnades and the punishments of the Inquisition. According to Plutarch, the inhabitants of Attica, after the insurrection of Simon, were divided into three parties, corresponding to the differences in the geographical configuration of the country. Those who lived in the mountains wanted a popular government at any price. Those who lived in the plains demanded an oligarchical government, while the dwellers along the seacoast preferred a mixed form of government. Subchapter 110. Points of Convergence. In the places where values converge and where the people come most into contact with others, they are most inclined to innovation and revolution. Poland undoubtedly owes its early civilization and its revolts, as well as, later, its misfortunes, to the position which it occupies in the meeting point of Slav, Teuton, and Byzantine. Those departments of France that are situated upon the course of the great rivers, the Seine, Rhone, and Loire, or which include the great ports, furnish, aside from other causes, the largest number of revolutionary votes. Subchapter 111. Density. The same thing is true of places with great density of population and great industrial activity. Here too the revolutionary spirit shows itself in a high state of development, just as the conservative spirit predominates in agricultural and thinly populated regions. Subchapter 112. Healthfulness, Genius. Both the salubrity and fertility of a country exercise an influence in the development of the revolutionary spirit, as I have shown in the case of Italy by a long series of figures. Genius too plays its part, and it is for this reason that Florence, Athens, and Geneva, cities noted for their men of genius, have also been noted for insurrections. Geniuses and revolts have likewise been numerous in the Romagna and in Liguria, which are among the most healthful parts of Italy. In France the parallelism is still clearer, for in 75 departments out of 86, genius, tall stature, and anti-monarchical parties go together. Subchapter 113. Races. The ethnic influence in its turn is incontestable. By a study of the votes and the revolts in France, I have shown that the departments in which Ligurian and Gallic races predominate have furnished the greatest number of rebels, and that the Iberians and Cimbrians have furnished the minimum. Many small districts and single cities, like Arlanol and Leghorn, are known for their constant tendency to revolt. The history of the Alpuanian Ligurians explains to us why today anarchy and insurrection often break out among them. The Ligures were continually in revolt against the Romans. Subchapter 114. Crossing of Races. The ethnic influence comes out very plainly in the crossing of races, which is able to make them all more revolutionary and progressive. This is a phenomenon connected with that discovered in the vegetable world by Darwin, that even bisexual plants ought to be cross-fertilized, and also with the law of remains, according to which independent variation is a primary cause of evolution. The Ionians give us an excellent example. They were revolutionary, and produced the greatest geniuses of Greece, certainly as a consequence of the fact that they were early crossed with Lydians and Persians in Asia Minor and the islands, and in addition were subjected to the influence of a change of climate. The crossing of the poles with the Teutonic race, all the more potent because the latter was in the nascent state, explains why Poland rose in so short a time to great intellectual heights in the midst of other slayers still barbarous. And this at a time when these very Germans who brought to the Poles the first seeds of their civilization had themselves but a low degree of culture. We have here, then, a partial explanation of Poland's continual insurrections. The climatic and racial crossing of the South American natives with the European colonists in the Spanish republics has produced a race active both commercially and intellectually, but above all things given to revolution. Modern Spain cannot boast of a Ramos Mejis, a Roca, a Mitri, or a Pinero. Subchapter 115. Bad Government. A government under which the public welfare is neglected and respectable persons persecuted, it is always provocative of insurrections and revolutions. Persecutions make great changes in men's ideas and feelings. Benjamin Franklin, on the eve of the American Revolution, in a pamphlet entitled Rules by which a great empire may be reduced to a small one, sums up as follows the characteristics of the bad government which, as a matter of fact, in a short time drove his country to revolt. "Do you wish," he writes, addressing the mother country, "to irritate your colonies and drive them into rebellion? Here is an infallible method. Always suppose them ready to revolt, and treat them accordingly. Place in their midst soldiers who, by their insolence, may provoke an insurrection, and then put it down with bullets and bayonets." In a country where political reforms keep pace with the aspirations of the people, insurrections seldom or never occur. The reign of Louis Philippe in France, favourable to the wealthy classes, but without any sympathy with the mass of the people, multiplied insurrections and political crimes which disappeared in the first years of the Caesarean democratic government of Napoleon III, who impressed the people by his magnificence and his attempts at social reform. It is a fact demonstrated by the statistics of persons indicted for political causes from 1826 to 1880, including offences of the press, that the Napoleonic period, 1851 to 70, corresponds with the minimum number of political trials. A table is displayed on the page, comparing the years of 1826 to 1880, compared with cases uncontradictory and cases of contumacy. The struggle for supremacy between different social classes is an effect of that inequality which Aristotle calls the source of all revolutions. On the one side, he writes, are those who desire equality, and who rise and revolt if they believe they have less than others, even though they really have as much as the most favoured. On the other side, there are those who aspire to power, and who, although equality exists, rise in insurrection if they think that this equality is no sound reason for being. Abuse of power by the dominant class is enough to produce a reaction, and Aristotle says again, politics, to whatever side a government inclines, it always degenerates through an exaggeration of the principles upon which it is based. In France, the revolution of 1789, which appeared to have choked the monarchical principle with the blood of the king, degenerating into anarchy, prepared the way for the empire, and the whole process was repeated by the Republic in 1849 and the Second Empire. Subchapter 116. Exclusive predominance of one class, priests. Whatever the form of government, the dominance of one class or caste over another has always been a source of danger, through hindering the organic development of a country and predisposing it first to atrophy and then to anarchy. It is thus that the dominance of the clergy in Spain and Scotland, and in Italy, in the Papal States and the Kingdom of Naples, for a long time retarded the progress of these countries and drove them to revolt. It was for analogous reasons that the tyranny of the Roman patricians, notwithstanding their defeat, led to the conspiracies of Saturninus and of Catiline, and then to the dictatorship of Caesar. This last, in its turn, led to the conspiracy of Brutus, which finally failed because the rise of the empire represented a justifiable reaction of the lower classes against the oligarchy. Not infrequently, members of an oligarchy, struggling with one another for power, such as Ninos, leave the way open for the people to overthrow them. In Florence in the Middle Ages, the tyranny of the nobles prepared the way for the triumph of petty tradesmen, and the abuses of this class brought about, in turn, the election of the Duke of Athens. Although he sought to repress the abuse of power, ended by alienating the people from him and being himself driven out. When, on the contrary, the social classes and the powers pertaining to them are in a state of equilibrium, liberty is preserved and revolutions become very rare. In this way, according to Aristotle, the long duration of the Spartan government is to be explained. Power was evenly distributed between the higher classes, represented by the Senate, and the mass of the people who chose the ephors by public vote. Further, the power of the kings was much circumscribed, and since there were two of them, they could not easily come to an agreement, and consequently only rarely became tyrants. Subchapter 117. Parties and Divisions. Parties, though at times useful in the struggle of the weak against the strong, are often what Coco calls them, a means of corrupting the individual, and through the individual, the nation. This is seen as a spectacle offered by the situation in the medieval Italian cities, especially in Florence, when an exaggerated and intolerant party spirit led to complete political and intellectual exhaustion. Another example of this is to be found in the Argentine Republic, where the Unitaries of Buenos Aires brought about the reaction under Rosas. They were a party of typical utopians, revolutionary idealists, who wanted to march straight on, with head high, not deviating a hair's breadth from their course. Even on the eve of a battle, they were taken up with a regulation, a formula, or a pompous phrase. It would be impossible to find men with better logic, more enterprise, or less common sense. Since parties are favourable to political liberty, the more ground they gain in the political life, the less important do secret political societies become. These latter are the fruit of oppression, since oppression turns ideas into feelings, and these in their turn produce sects and societies. It is certainly to this origin that modern civilization is indebted for many reforms and other services in the political field. It is enough to recall the Carbonari in Italy, the Chartists in England, the Italia in Greece, and the Nihilists in Russia. The ideal of these last, it is true, has little correspondence with the feelings of the Russian people, since what Stepniak said of an early period is still true, that in the popular mind the Tsar and God are welded together. In Italy, the Fraternal Hand, discovered at Girgenti in 1883, was originally a society for mutual aid in case of sickness or death. But soon it degenerated. Certain duties occasioned certain crimes. Everyone was bound to make himself respected for the honour of the organization, to protect the women, to revenge the injuries of his comrades, and to help save them if they were accused. They ended by ordering assassinations and executing them in the same way that a hunter chases a hare. They imitated juries, and prevented outsiders from bidding at the political auctions. The result was that respectable persons had to affiliate with them, or buy protection against them from other criminals. In Ireland, side by side with the Land League, which served the country with loyalty and patriotism, there rose up the Society of the Invincibles, which numbered not more than 200 members, but speedily distinguished itself by all sorts of agrarian crimes. Subchapter 118. Imitation. We have seen that through imitation, criminality, insanity, and hallucination become epidemic in a mob. Hence, imitation becomes a powerful factor in producing an insurrection. This may occur on a large scale, one nation imitating another and producing a veritable epidemic of revolutions. This is what happened, according to Ferrari, in the period from 1378 to 1494, during which the European peoples imitated the great number of Italian uprisings against the ancient lords. At Rome under Rienzi, at Genoa under Adorno, at Florence under Ghiombi, at Palermo under the Alissi, and at Naples under the Lazzari. In this period took place the insurrection of the Hussites in Bohemia, the revolts of the working people in the free cities of Germany, Worms, Hall, Lubeck, Aix, the refusal of the burghers of Ghent to pay taxes, the Swiss War of Independence, the uprisings of the Swedish peasants under Engelbert and the Croatian peasants under Horvat, and in England the religious movement initiated by Wycliffe. The men of 1793 imitated, or rather aped, the heroes of Plutarch, Buckle, as the Napoleons imitated the Caesars. In 1789 in France, almost all the departments imitated the September massacres of Paris, and later those of the White Terror. Aristotle names as one of the causes of revolts the neighbourhood of countries with other forms of government. The nearness of the oligarchical Spartan government often caused the overthrow of the democracy in Athens, and vice versa. Subchapter 119. Epidemic Ideals. Many ideals spread themselves almost like epidemics. So was it formerly with the monarchical ideal, the glory of one's own king. So with the ideal of popular sovereignty, that of nationality, and so it is now with the ideal of the amelioration of economic conditions. It is not that today conditions are worse than they were in the days of our fathers. On the contrary, the famines which used to mow down their millions now gather in only a few hundreds of victims, and our workmen today own more shirts than many a proud noble of antiquity. But men's needs and their repugnance to the labour necessary to satisfy them have increased in proportion to the economic betterment that has been going on. Subchapter 120. Historic Traditions. Every revolution, wrote Machiavelli, lays a stepping stone for another one. We see revolutions, as a matter of fact, repeating the form of revolutions which happened even at remote periods. Thus the Roman tribunate lived again in Rome with Rienzi and Baroncelli, and later with Cicaraccio and Coccopellier, notwithstanding many differences in the institutions and individuals. The revolutionary tendencies of the Romagna were well known even in the Middle Ages, and Dante refers to them in the words, "The heart of the Romagna is, and ever will be, at war with tyrants." The Paris Commune imitated the revolution of 1789, as 89 had imitated the Jacquerie, while the National Assembly of Paris copied the old provincial assemblies. We may say that in Paris barricades have become a decennial habit, like military revolutions in Spain, attempts upon the life of the Tsar in Russia, and brigandage in Greece and Macedonia. A last proof of this influence of tradition is that those revolutionary governments perish which do not know how to hold them in honour. The great difference between the old form of government and the new, the more unstable, is the adherence of the people. For this cause those revolutions have been most fortunate that have held the past in honour. Thus the older Brutus kept for the people their king, under the name of Rex Sacrificialis. The Caesars likewise retained the tribunate, the senate, and other forms of the republican government, even to the extent of limiting themselves to the military title Imperator General. Just so the English in the Magna Charta professed to confirm ancient rights, and in Italy the Guelphs, following the Ghibellines in Italy, chose a captain of the people from among the nobles, as the Ghibellines had chosen their podesta. This did not escape the keen intellect of Machiavelli, who wrote, "Whoever would reform a free state must preserve the shadow of the old forms. In changing old institutions, the human mind must be at pains to make the transformation preserve as much as possible of that which is ancient." Subchapter 121. Inappropriate Political Reforms. Only men ignorant of human nature or excessively despotic would make decrees not necessitated by the conditions of the moment, and destroy old institutions to replace them with new, not because they were demanded, but because they were in use in other social organisms. By such means a discontent with every kind of reform is awakened, and since the new is not based upon the old, there results an active antipathy which produces a constant succession of revolutions. This is what happened to the reforms of Ronaldo and Savonarola. This is what came to pass when Rienzi tried to bring about a political reform which even Cavour could not carry out completely. The same situation again was repeated in France in the attempt of Marcel, at a time when even a constitution was not possible, to bring about a republican federation with proportional taxation, social and administrative unity, general political rights, national authority substituted for royal, and Paris as the head of France. To reform everything is to destroy everything, wrote Coco with regard to the Napoleonic Revolution of 1799. In Spain, Charles III was able, through the power of his personality and authority, to curb the power of the clergy, and to ameliorate the condition of the country. But no sooner had he fallen from power than all his reforms ceased without leaving a regret, because they were premature. In 1812, in 1820, and in 1836, there was no lack of ardent reforms in the Spanish government, but they failed because they were not in touch with the feeling of the people. In 1814 and 1823, the popular indignation drove out the Cortes. Aquin tells that everywhere the king passed, the crowd hurled insults at the Liberals, the Constitution, and the Cortes. Subchapter 122. Religion. Religion in Asiatic and African countries not only mixed with politics, but was itself the only politics, sometimes revolutionary, but more often revolutionary according to the character of the religion. In India, Nanak, 1469, by performing miracles, founded the religion of the Sikhs, which was based upon monotheism, the abrogation of caste, and the blessedness of nirvana. The founder himself made few proselytes, but under Havoghind, one of his successors, the Sikhs took up arms against the Mussulman fanaticism, won new power during the Maratha uprising, founded a sort of republic, and today number nearly 2 millions. Muhammad put an end to fetishism, conquered Arabia, and notwithstanding his ignorance, one of the surahs of his Quran has any sense in it, he produced a revolution even in the field of science. For from 750 to 1250 AD, with the ostensible purpose of explaining the Quran, the Arabs translated the Greek authors and made gigantic encyclopedic compilations which were disseminated through Europe, as if to establish once and for all the parallelism of religion and politics. The convention decreed the worship of the Supreme Being and organized the love feast, and the populace put at its head the mad Catherine Theot, who preached the immortality of the body and at 70 declared that she was about to become young again. The Jacobins favored the society of the Theophilanthropes, who celebrated their festivals in Notre Dame, the new Temple of Reason, and in Segroc, the Temple of Genius, where before the altars sentimental verses from the classics were sung and feasts were celebrated for Socrates, St. Vincent, Rousseau, and Washington. In ancient Israel, the reaction under Jeroboam followed the reign of Solomon, because the latter, a revolutionary, at least in art and industry, had anticipated the popular mind by several centuries. Thus a reaction is sure to result whenever an attempt is made to set aside dominant customs and superstitions. One of the causes of the uprising of the enemies against the French was the lack of reverence manifested by the Europeans for the ancient documents which were held in such honor by the natives, probably because they thought them endowed with magic power, that they had societies for the express purpose of collecting and caring for them. All the insurrections against the English in India have been caused by violations of the custom or religion of the people. Thus the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857 was caused not by the violent occupation of the ancient kingdom of Oudh on the part of the East India Company, so much as by the preaching of Protestant missionaries, and their overzealous attempts at proselytism, arousing the opposition of Brahmin and Mussulman alike, and further by the fact that the sepoys were required to use cartridges smeared with pork fat. Subchapter 123. Economic influences. The influence of economic causes in many of the greatest revolutionary movements of recent centuries has been demonstrated by Loria with incontestable proofs. The strife of classes in England flared up when the nobility began to make laws that were in the interest of the landowners, and prejudicial to manufacturing. Such was the situation when the middle classes gathered about Elizabeth and triumphed with her over Mary Stuart and her nobles. The same phenomenon was repeated with Cromwell and with William of Orange. The same antagonism manifested itself in Germany in the 16th century, when the nobility, represented by the electoral princes, having exclusive political power, passed laws hostile to capital and commerce, levying imposts on imports and exports. In Italy, the contests of the Guelphs and Ghibellines masked the strife between the manufacturers and the feudal nobility. In France, it was the middle classes, long powerless against king and nobles, and furthermore excluded from the National Assembly, who stirred up the people to revolt, and put to flight both court and aristocracy. Even modern Italyism, according to Rocher, springs from the contests between the moneyed and the landed classes. It came especially from the favour shown by the commercial classes and small profiteers to the ransom of the peasants, to the detriment of the nobility, who responded by allying themselves with disinherited men of family and all the other enemies of the middle classes. Loria. Jen remarks that the prosperity of China springs from the system of canals which fertilizes it, and that every emperor who neglects the canals speedily falls. Subchapter 124, Taxes and Changes in the Currency. Very often it is the government itself that, through ignorance of economic laws, aggravates the disorder already existing, and provokes insurrection. Thus it was in France, when one of the causes of the Revolution of 1360 was that under the Valois, the value of gold was changed 26 times in a single year. Similarly, in Sicily, according to Amari, the discontent occasioned by the alteration of the value of the money was not without influence in causing the Sicilian Vespers. Luria. In 1382 in Paris, the tax upon vegetables called forth the uprising of the Maillotins. In 1640, Mazarin doubled the taxes on food supplies in Paris, and the people built the barricades of the 26th of August. The court, becoming terrified, treated with them, and granted a diminution in the taxes of more than 12 million francs. In 1639, the people of Rouen rose in insurrection with the cry of death to the Gabeleurs. But the uprising was extinguished in the blood of the rioters themselves. The popular hatred of the tax agents continued to be actively in evidence, however, until the government finally prohibited the use of the epithets publican, extortioner, and monopolist against the tax collectors. Even when a tax is just, that it should affect one class more directly than another is sufficient to stir up an insurrection. Thus the tax on grain of Pavia and the land tax of Florence produced revolts which were inspired by the middle classes. Subchapter 125, Economic Crisis. Industrial and commercial crises had in ancient times no very great influence in revolutions, being responsible for local uprisings merely. This was the case in Rome, where, according to Carlo, the great agitations had for their moving cause the debts to which the people were liable, rather than the agrarian laws. During the fierce contest between the consulate and the tribunate, when economic prosperity was in no way lacking, Spurius Cassius, who proposed an agrarian law by which the common property was to be divided in part among the poorer citizens, not only was not supported by the people, but was put to death, simply because he wished that the Latin allies should share in the division. Subchapter 126, Pauperism Strikes. It is our own time alone that has seen the great political and social revolutions caused by the disproportion between the rewards of labour and those of speculative capital, and further by new needs which make the people feel more keenly than ever before the reality of their sad condition. The Darwinian theory, it is true, concedes a difference between individuals, and in consequence a necessary inequality in wealth. But the sentiment of humanity, which receives its first breath from Christ, and which time has not been able to weaken, is not willing to permit, whatever the theory of Darwin may be, that a man who is working should die of hunger, and that a man who is willing and able to be of service should look to work in vain. When one sees that thousands of peasants in Italy, whose interests not a single representative has taken up in Parliament, are compelled to live upon spoiled maize, for which no one has thought out a remedy; when one sees that whole districts in the Alps are decimated by goitre and cretinism, simply because 1/100th part of the money wasted on useless monuments is not spent in supplying these people with wholesome water; when one thinks that in the plains of Italy, at the gates of the two largest cities, malaria rages and decimates the population, one is compelled to conclude that if the peasants protest by uprising and strikes, the responsibility falls upon those who have not found a way to remedy the evil. In France, the strikes of 1882 in Rouen, Béziers, Montpellier, and other industrial centres in the south, and the more serious troubles in Monteau-les-Mines and Lyons, were the result of a socialistic agitation having a pronounced political character. In the United States, the Revolutionary Socialist Party, which has its centre in Chicago, seems to grow in importance constantly, partially from economic crises occasioned especially by railroad speculation, and partially from the disregard of the proletariat on the part of both the leading political parties. Now it is to this organization that we must attribute a great part of the strikes which occur with such frequency, 160 in 2 years. In comparison with the past, our own age shows many more uprisings from economic than from military causes. Disturbances preceding the economic conditions are most abundant in the countries that best represent modern life, like France, England, and Belgium, while it is the military rebellions that take place in countries like Spain and Turkey which represent a bygone age. From the statistics of insurrections during the first half of the 19th century, we get the following. A table is displayed on the page listing country of Spain, Turkey, Belgium and England, the total insurrections, number having military causes, and number having economic causes. Spain, 19 total insurrections, 5 military causes, 3 economic causes. Turkey, 24 insurrections, 9 military causes, 1 economic cause. Belgium, 16 insurrections, 0 military causes, 8 economic causes. England, 15 insurrections, 0 military causes, 8 economic causes. Subchapter 127, Change of Environment. We find in this connection many singular contradictions. The very hot climate of Egypt makes anti-revolutionists of the Semites, the Fellahs, and even the Berbers, who in the mountains of Algeria are in a continual state of revolution, so that in Algiers they show the graves of 7 Beys, all named and killed in a single day. In new surroundings, the Dutch agriculturists become the nomadic Boers of South Africa, the Norman hunters become bold sea rovers, the pastoral Jews became merchants, and the strictly conservative Anglo-Saxons became the free innovators and revolutionaries of North America. A good government can succeed in preventing the disorders that spring from difference of race, especially when there enters the factor of the attrition which large bodies of people have for smaller bodies of a different kind. The latter is one of the most powerful factors in the fusion of the Semitic Sards with the Celtic Piedmontese, and of the thoroughly Italian Corsicans with the French. When peoples here lived in a state of isolation, the first crossings, Dorians, Romans, provoke violent disturbances, but later, as evolution proceeds, economic and political interests become more important than questions of race. Thus it is true that the Poles execrate the Russians because of their despotism, notwithstanding their common Slavic blood. On the other hand, the people of the Rhine Valley, although German in the main, incline more towards the French than towards a nation of their own blood, because habit and commercial interest count for more with them than race. The dominance of different factors at certain periods, as for example, the economic factor in our own day, is explained by the fact that in sociology, as well as in chemistry, certain agents are the most active in the nascent state. Physiology also teaches us that of a series of similar stimuli, the first is most strongly felt. Hence it is that the influence of climate is still effective, even after being hidden or weakened by the influence of race. For this reason, in certain countries, as in Florence for example, the configuration of the land is much less effect upon the occurrence of uprisings and acts of violence than it formerly had. Holland is a cold, level country, and for this reason is naturally anti-revolutionary. But the battle with the sea and with foreign oppressors has had a modifying influence. Religion has upon the whole very little influence upon the course of cultural evolution, but the nascent state is exceedingly favourable to revolt and revolution. New religions are almost always accompanied by a real revolution in morals and character, genuine reforms which win them adherents from among respectable people. History gives us examples of this in the rise of Buddhism, Christianity, and Lutheranism, and we see the influence still today of the Lazarists and in certain Russian sects. Subchapter 128, Occasional Causes. Aristotle affirms that oligarchies commonly go to pieces through the too great preponderance of certain of their members, and that when they are in difficulties they try to extricate themselves by raising insurrections. In Syracuse, he tells us, the constitution was changed because of a love affair which drove 2 young noblemen and the followers to revolt. Speaking of tyrannicides, he finds that they are most frequently caused by personal injuries. Baker remarks that some too lively expressions of certain princes have sometimes been the spark that killed a revolt. Thus Galba destroyed himself when he said, Legi a se militum nomemi, the soldiers no longer having any hope that he would pay them for their votes. Probus was equally lost when he uttered the words, Si vexero non opus erit amplius Romano impero militibus, for the soldiers immediately revolted against him. Even in our own century, riots have originated from comparatively trifling causes. Thus, in 1821, a revolt broke out in Madrid because the king either could not or would not take part in a certain procession. In 1867, Bucharest rose in revolt against the monopoly of tobacco, and the same year there was a riot in Manchester because of the arrest of the 2 Fenians. In 1876, an insurrection took place in Amsterdam because of the abolition of one of the annual fairs. Subchapter 129. War. Wars are often the cause of domestic disturbances. Greek history, especially the history of the oligarchies, abundantly illustrates this. According to Soltykh, the victorious wars which the Poles waged in the 17th and 18th centuries formed one of the causes of the downfall of Poland, because they bore heavily upon the poor without any corresponding advantages, and increased the activity of the conquered peoples. The Franco-Prussian War overcame the disinclination felt in many circles toward the idea of the empire in Germany. This is shown in the statistics of the case of Les Majestés. While the sentences for this offence from 1846 to 1848 ran as high as 342, and 1849 reached 369, they fell to 132 and 193 in 1879 and 1880. According to Renan, the two great products of the Hebrew race, the Jewish religion and the Christian, are to be attributed not solely to the prophets, but also to the perturbations produced by the Assyrian and Roman victories. It must be added that such occasional causes of insurrections are plainly only a pretext, affording an opportunity for the outbreak of a people already predisposed to revolt. The brutality of a soldier and the lasciviousness of a prince gave occasion for the Sicilian Vespers and for the expulsion of the Tarquins. But to see that these things were only the occasion, and not the whole cause, it is only necessary to recall how many infamous crimes on the part of conquering kings and peoples Italy has suffered to go unpunished. End of section 18.